Hello, welcome to another Sonic Labs special presentation. I'm here with Alex from Source Distribution, who is the synth guy, right?
I'm surrounded by synths.
We are. We've got a lot of stuff here, and it's all connected using the Arturia Beatstep Pro, because if you're watching this, this should be the day before release, and we filmed this a couple of weeks ago because Alex kindly had one with him while we were shooting a piece on the Eventide H9, which I thoroughly recommend that you check out. So, Alex, what is going on here? There's quite a very good question. Intriguing setup.
What isn't going on here? Yeah, so basically we have the Beatstep Pro and we've got it hooked up to a load of hardware gear. So the idea of the Beatstep Pro is it's a hardware sequencer. I mean, it is also like a knobby controller. You can use it for editing synths and, you know, sending MIDI CCs, you know, like you would with a knobby box. But like with the original Beatstep, that was the original idea, but it was also a sequencer. And I think for a lot of people, maybe perhaps the most exciting thing, the thing they really latched onto was the fact it was a sequencer. So this is like that times two, kind of plus like the Spark as well, like the Spark drum sequencer. But it's all standalone. This is kind of the most important thing to point out. So what we've got here is we're actually just powering off a USB. I've got one of those like Apple, you know, plugs down there, and it plugs in via USB. And it's totally standalone. We can make sequences and connect it to almost any type of gear that we can imagine.
And that will drive CV.
Yeah.
So let's go through. So we've got MIDI output. We've got, is it 2 rows of gate CV?
So yes, so we've got MIDI output, and that can be, we can change the channels. And the bottom line is we have 2 sequencers, so 2 monophonic lines that can be up to 64 steps each. And we can send those via good old-fashioned MIDI DIN. You get these little sort of kind of breakout cables as well with it. We can also send that MIDI via USB, so that if we plug this directly into our computer, it'll power, and then we can send sequences too. Yep. And then, yeah, lastly, we have MIDI CV, and there is just like a ridiculously stupid amount of CV output on it. So you have, yeah, 2 completely independent CV and gate lanes, and they also have this thing called velocity, which is just like basically modulation. So the pitch output is, I believe, 0 to 10 volts, as is the velocity lane. It's perhaps not as accurate as the pitch output, which obviously has to be calibrated and very accurate to, you know, tune your microboot or your modular or what have you. You can also change the scaling. So it's 1 volt per octave by default, but it does support hertz to voltage. So folks who have, you know, Korg MS-20s and Yamaha CS5s and stuff are not left out in the cold.
That'll work as well.
Yeah.
I'm astonished at how it can power all of the lights and 3 CV outputs
off of
5 volts.
Yeah. I don't know, they're magic, they're wizards, those folks in Grenoble, so it does work, is the bottom line.
Is there any limit to the scale, you know, to the range that you can
I don't think so, no, you should be able to send a full 10 volts from all of the things simultaneously.
So that'll be, what's that, volt per octave, that's going to 10 octaves, isn't it?
It's quite a lot, yeah, it's quite a range. And it's, yeah, and then you also have gates, we didn't mention them. Those are, I believe, 0 to 12 volts, so basically the Beatstep, the original Beatstep didn't output quite so much volume, and the ways of kind of upscaling the sort of gate length or gate volume, I should say, so that you could trigger things like ART 2600s, which have a 10 volt requirement. But with this, you should just be able to trigger pretty much.
And that's what we're doing. In fact, what we're doing here is you've got tip-top audio.
So yeah, we've got tip-top 808s and 909s, and it just triggers those absolutely fine. But
I've been wondering when I might get this in somewhere.
I know, yeah, I've seen this in here before.
SDS8 brain.
I was happy to give you a reason to sort of bust this out.
Well, thank you.
It's like, this thing is just awesome. But yeah, and then this has, we've seen it has those trigger inputs, and they were, I don't know a lot about the Simmons, but I
guess they were quite low because they'd just be piezo from the tab, from the pad, so they wouldn't be generating.
You have like a sensitivity. I guess we've got those kind of down low. But whatever the case, we just used mono 3.5mm jacks straight into the 6.35mm jack inputs, and it triggers it triggers fine, and then so it just triggers it immediately. And by default, by the way, this is the other thing, we have a drum sequencer as well. So you've got a drum lane. In this kind of hardware fashion, I'm actually only using the bottom 8. These correspond in a sort of line to the 1 to 8s at the back.
Right. What does the top row do then?
So in this mode, they don't do anything because we're using this. Actually, that's not strictly true. The bottom line is if you connect this via USB and MIDI, you actually can send 16 lanes of like drum data, including velocities as well. And what's nice is you can also change the MIDI notes that they're corresponding to. So if you've got like there's a few bits of kit like the Vermona Performer that isn't the one that has like the gate inputs, where you would need to remap. Or if you've got like the Nord drum and you're like, well, I want it to be C#3 that the bass drum works on.
You can change all of that.
There's like a little MIDI, it's called MIDI Control Center. You just hook this up
it's like an editor, right.
Yeah, and you hook it up via USB, and then you can sort of look in the brain of the Beatstep and just sort of reassign all of those so it'll work with what you want. You could also set them up to like a scale if you wanted and send that off to control a synth if you've got creative. You don't have to use it. I guess that's the key thing to stress is don't get too hung up on the fact there are gate outputs if you don't have that gear. There's fun sort of things you could do.
And did you say that had MIDI DIN?
Yeah,
DIN sync out
DIN
as well?
sync. So, I mean, we get a bunch of cables with it. So we get the power cable. You do need to have your own little power plug if you want to have it separately. But, you know, if you've got sort of, most phones have that. And then we get these little MIDI DIN cables, so MIDI DIN. So that's in and out because obviously it sends all its MIDI. Also, we can just change the channel very easily. So if I come here, I can change. This is sequencer 1, sequencer 2, and then 10 is what my drum is sending on. You see they're color coded, so you can just, you know, change them, change what my drum's responding on. But we also get this little black MIDI DIN cable. So if you're
that's a DIN sync for
if you're a Roland head, you can basically use DIN sync and sync it to 303s and 808s if you're very old school. And you can also change in the brain. You can change like the PPQN from like one note to 48 and 24.
So you can use this effectively as a control center for analog equipment and digital MIDI stuff. And we've got
at the same time.
The Micro Brute is playing on one of the sequencer tracks.
It is,
well,
yeah.
right?
So look, I've got sequencer 2. And then this is just to give you an idea of how the sort of note entry works. You may not realise that it's got this.
That's because the Beatstep, the original Beatstep, you had to kind of dial in each one, and it didn't really make sense. But now that makes sense. And then this just does the octave up and down.
So like you see, it's just these are the black notes, these are the white notes, as it were. And then we go up. So we can just play in, or you can use, you can enter a gate as in activate a note, so that says 6, and this is knob 6, and if I come on here,
you can dial it in if you want, so you could do it both ways.
And it gives you like the little preview of the note.
So you can real-time record, right?
Yeah, so it's amazing. I mean, I've got like a little groovy sequence here. And what's happening here is that I've got sequencer 1 controlling the Overhigh Matrix 1000.
Over MIDI, right?
Over MIDI. So that's going in, little MIDI cable here, and it's being reverbed.
I can hear the dulcet tones of the H9 reverb, endless reverb, lovely.
I'm just absolutely smothering it in reverb.
Of course, it's the only way.
It is the only way, it's what I do. So the other thing is then we have the Micro Brute, you hear? And the Micro Brute is actually going via CD.
Right.
So actually, at the same time, it is still sending CVs via sequencer 1. We could get creative and use
controlling other
gear at the same time if you wanted to. And then drums, we come down here, and you can see here that I'm looping within just 16 beats. And if I just hit record, and if I fluff that, you can work in a very, and then if I want to enter my snare, but I don't want to hear my snare, as in if I'm actually on stage and I want to program this thing while there's a crowd, you hold drum and then you select, this is where my snare is. This is your Simmons.
So is it quantizing this as it goes in real time? So is it possible to do that kind of flux type mode that you can do with some other sequences where it'll just do sort of random recording?
I don't know yet. This is sort of early days for me, so I'm learning this too. What you can do, though, that's quite interesting, is if you come into this lane here, shift actually, it's what it defaults to. If I have like perhaps the snare selected, and I come to the corresponding knob, so this is on beat 5, and then this is knob 5. See the value here.
Is that moving it off,
slipping
off grid?
Do you hear how it's like starting to go a bit wonky? So we don't have to adhere strictly to the grid.
So you can move into it. Oh,
Yeah,
okay, that's
I'm not sure if it's like I think it is quantizing it as we go, which is helpful for sloppy people like me. But it's nice to be able to introduce a bit more randomness as we go.
So then, I guess if we wanted to put some 16 parts in, you can just do the same thing where you wipe.
Yeah, you can.
Your thumb.
They're sort of like little rubberized things, but it can be done. Also, we have the kind of looper and roller function, which is this kind of real-time. And this is just basically like a sort of real-time loop grabber.
And it just changed the granularity.
Just sort of loops and holds that thing, so it's like a little performance effect you can.
So how about putting something, some 16 or 8 parts in there?
Yeah, so we can obviously hold this.
Are the pads, do they transmit pressure as well over MIDI?
I don't know actually, yeah, as in like the kind of aftertouch value. I'm not sure. They're certainly velocity sensitive, so it is recording the velocity when we hit notes.
I'll find that out in the review.
Yeah, exactly. But yes, you can sort of put in, you can also hold shift, and then we get access to sort of different sequencer modes per lane. So what that means is we have different scales for like pitch, so we can constrain the scales, and we have a bunch of built-in ones. It's like the Beatstep. You have chromatic, major, minor, Dorian, Mixolydian, harmonic minor, and blues.
That's for the knobs, is it?
Well, it's not just for the knobs. No, it's for the little pads as well. Oh. So, but the cool thing is that we have this user scale at the end, and what that is just your own set of scales, and you set those up by going into the little MIDI control center and literally engaging. You have a little list. You know, like I want, C, F sharp, A, and B. Those are what I want, say. And
so you could just create, those are the only notes that it'll play.
And then it'll save into the memory, and then that's your user scale, and you can go and save it, and it will affect the little knobs, and it will affect the keys. And also, just to sort of bring this in, because it has a bearing, we have this swing, randomness, and probability thing. And what that's doing is it means per sequencer lane, or per sort of set, or globally or per sequencer, we can introduce randomness and probability, which will also be constrained.
So we can create all sorts of crazy,
funny little like variations. So if you start doing that, I mean, we can sort of see if it starts, if we can play with it and we can hear it. But randomness will be constrained to the scale that we've got chosen. So if I start to increase randomness, and then the probability of randomness.
So that's our reverbed Matrix 1000 is now starting to veer off course.
It's like, things start kind of in a wonky fashion. I mean, at the moment we've got it in chromatic is the thing. I mean, it wasn't sort of working to a particular scale, but if you'd worked with user selected, perhaps,
it would only throw notes in that were relevant.
Yeah, exactly. So
it sounds like in terms of performance, this thing can really get you
it's
a
just
lot of
like,
places.
Yeah, and I think the thing to stress is that like, it's really simple. We just literally, I'll show you, I mean, we can go to like an empty project and just show you from scratch. So that's the other thing, is that you can save projects. I should point that out. So here's one I made earlier. And if I go here.
And then switch patterns from within. So it's kind of like scenes and clips.
Exactly, yeah. So I didn't make that with these sounds in mind, so it sounds a little funky. So you can actually change these on the fly. It's really nice. If you've got like you could have like a bank full of like nice top lines, a bank full of bass lines that are musically relevant and related to each other, and a bank of drums.
Right,
it could be 16, by the way. There's 16 projects, and each project can have 16 of these loops, and then we can like vary them. So you see, you can then be like, well, here's my sort of library of clips, and I can sort of jam between them on the fly.
So you get, so does a project have 16 clips in it? So if you're saving a new project, I'd have a different set of 16 clips.
So they're saved with the project. So it's each 16 projects with 16 clips per lane. So there's 16 for sequencer 1, 16 for 2, and 16 for the drums.
So you can offset.
And they're all totally different.
And what about odd numbers of steps and that?
Well, there's. So if I come in here, probably the best way to show you is this last step thing. So this is basically, we can have steps up to 64, we can have sequences up to 64 steps long, and we can have different lengths. So sequencer 1 could be 16 beats and sequencer 2 could be 48. So we can have different lengths. It's not kind of globally.
So you can add odd numbers in the steps.
But then, yeah, what you do is you come into this last step thing, and then I can... So you see how when sequencer 2 hits 13, it repeats at that point. Like,
right, so you can
kind of improvise and jam around from within your own little bank of things and then move on.
The thing that I really like about it is it brings together both the worlds, because the thing about it is, you know, we do have sequencers in the Eurorack world.
Yeah.
But I find
Amazing
working with them within the constraints of that, this feels more natural to me, because there's a bit more kind of...
It's the idea that also it can sequence other things too, because there are Eurorack sequences that I love as well, but I can't send MIDI from them.
Right.
So, you know, we do, you know, it's an 80s protocol, but we don't always have it in modular land. So it's a really simple sequencer that can.
Can this be clocked from like trigger inputs?
Yeah, when we didn't actually talk about that, which is quite important. Yes, well pointed. So round the back here we have clock in and output, and we can send clock pulses to it. So if you've got an analog step sequencer or just an LFO,
or a arpeggiator or a rim shot or something.
Exactly, like you can send it clock pulses, and if I go up here, I can set it so that the Arturia, so that the Beatstep responds just to clocks, but it will also send clocks. So
it could be the heart of your system.
Yep.
Okay.
An analog system. So if the other things, like, you know, for folks who may have them, like those chord Volkers, for example, you can sync it via clock pulses. And the other point is you can also sync more beat steps. So you could have 2 or 3 of these. You could start to have like a...
The other thing I was going to ask about is,
thing.
Can the knobs send controller data?
Yes.
CV controller data?
Yes, they can. So basically that's another thing, just one sort of observational point. Do you see how when I touch the knobs, FNAR, that they show the note that they're currently set to, and the value is shown on here so you know what note you're hitting, which is good. But yes, they do. So you've got this CV lane. So if I wanted to, I could output through the velocity lane and stick it into the filter input of the microgroup.
And use that as a
and then what you do, you go down here just to velocity, and now when I adjust these knobs, then
that'll be
on here,
right.
It'll then change that, and so you can sequence from 0 to 10 volts, a sort of, you know, a stepped kind of...
Okay, I'm getting into the realms of review here. Do you know if it'll do portamento between values?
No, it jumps directly to those values. So you'd have to use a slew limiter in between just to slide those out. But and the other thing, if I stick it into control mode, then these all send and receive, send MIDI. But using the pads allows us, you know, we could be controlling a drum, some kind of drum thing, or just sending like, you know, enabling clips or enabling effects and stuff if we wanted to. But these will send MIDI CCs, and if we go into the that MIDI controller center thing, you know, the piece of software, then we can set it up so that we have our own set of MIDI CCs. So
wow, so I mean, this could be at the heart of a heck of a lot of stuff going.
You could have like, you know, you could have a big MIDI polysynth that responds to CCs, and you could be both sequencing it and tweaking it.
How does it work if you want to sequence a polysynth then?
So, as in
polyphonic.
Polyphonic. Unfortunately, you can't. So each, like, interestingly,
you can play the keyboard.
Sends, but it does.
It only records
sadly, the sequencer lines are just monophonic. That's the kind of the methodology. So if you try and put in a chord, it'll just, to the best of its ability, try and filter that into a monophonic line.
Right. So you'd need to maybe stack the notes in the synth if you
would.
Okay.
If your synth has got chord mode, or, you know, maybe if you run it through a computer, if you're running it through Ableton with chord mode or something, you could do it that way. So exactly. But unfortunately, it is monophonic.
I'm guessing prior to release day, it's going to be. I don't know whether we could say how much it is or not.
I'm not sure. I don't know what
the protocol is.
Yeah, exactly. What the final price will be.
If we can say, it will say down here now.
And isn't that a good price?
Yes.
Wouldn't you say?
What a story. We're like we're time travelers.
Exactly. But and the thing is, knowing the ballpark of what price this is going to be, I think anyone, you know, I don't mean this condescendingly, but if you know about what's out there in the market, there really isn't quite anything that could do what this can for this sort of money, because it's not just a sequencer, it also has the connectivity. So
yeah,
it's
presumably
standalone.
you can use this in terms of MIDI to CV, so you could throw
Oh,
that
you can,
on.
yeah. So, yeah, if you send in MIDI via USB or MIDI in, then you can output it through the line. So you can use it as a MIDI to CC converter and CV converter. True say. Yes.
Wow, it does seem, I mean, no wonder people have been getting so excited.
Yeah, they went
about it.
bonkers. And I like, your video of Sebastian with the,
That was
when he
great,
had all of the
18
sort of,
mini brutes or whatever
exactly,
it was.
yeah. Well, he's got that luxury. I've only got one, sadly. But
Yeah, well, you'll have to get down the warehouse and start opening some boxes.
they might notice. It's the only
Alex,
problem.
thank you so much. That
Thank
was
you,
great.
Nick. Cheers.
So thank you very much for watching. As we say, this is on the cusp or on the day of release. We're not sure exactly when this is going to go out, so choose what I said depending on what day it is. So yeah, a review will be forthcoming, but thank you very much to Alex for coming up and showing us. See you later.